Mississippi, August 1944. The heat rolled across the delta like a living thing, pressing against barns, cotton rows, and the prisoners who worked them. In the shade of a weathered wooden barn, 6 German women watched a southern farmer set down a sweating glass pitcher filled with amber, sweet tea. The ice cracked softly inside, but the women flinched as if they'd heard a gun. To them, nothing in America was harmless, not kindness, not hospitality, not a drink offered with a gentle hand. They had been taught the same terrifying lesson. When the enemy smiles, the poison comes next. The war had dragged the world into chaos, but nowhere felt stranger to the captured German women than the deep American South. They had survived North African campaigns, evacuation hospitals, air raids, and the brutal march into captivity, yet nothing prepared them for Mississippi's stillness. The delta stretched out like an endless green sea, silent except for cicadas and the creak of wooden windmills. It was a land that looked nothing like Europe, and nothing like the hell they expected. They had been taught a single truth: Americans were monsters, barbarians who despised them, who would starve them, beat them, treat them like animals. So when they were assigned to work on rural farms, fear followed them like a shadow. Every smile looked suspicious, every gesture felt like a trap, and every act of kindness seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the farmer who had been assigned these 6 prisoners, a quiet widower fighting his own battles, had no intention of becoming the monster they imagined. His sons were at war, his wife was gone, his fields were dying under the weight of heat and loneliness, and standing in front of him were 6 exhausted women who'd seen enough suffering for a lifetime. Soon, a single glass of sweet tea would change everything. Mississippi, August 1944. Dawn crept across the delta like a slow-moving tide, washing pale gold light over endless fields of cotton. The air was thick before the sun even fully rose, carrying the scent of soil and the weight of unbearable humidity. On the outskirts of Greenwood stood a small farm owned by Samuel Brooks, a quiet man in his 40s whose face carried more years than time alone could etch. He had lost his wife to illness 2 winters earlier, and his 2 boys were scattered across the world, one fighting in France, the other repairing aircraft in the Pacific. That left only Sam and the land, both weathered, both stubborn. On this particular morning, he leaned over the railing of his porch, sipping bitter coffee and staring at the dusty road that cut through his farm. A military truck would be arriving soon, bringing laborers he had not asked for, yet desperately needed. The fields could not be left unattended. Cotton waited for no one, not even a grieving man. 2 miles away, behind rows of wire fencing and watchtowers, 30 German women stood in formation at Camp Devlin, their gray uniforms clinging to their bodies in the heat. They had survived capture in Tunisia, interrogation camps in North Africa, and the suffocating Atlantic crossing. They expected brutality. They expected a place where they would be worked until they collapsed. Instead, they found routine strict, yes, but predictable, even humane. Yet fear still traveled with them, clinging like sweat. Among them was Lena Vogt, a 28-year-old nurse with sharp eyes and a calmness that unnerved even her fellow prisoners. She had tended to wounded soldiers in makeshift tents, often patching up boys far younger than her. She carried her memories like a second uniform, visible only in the moments she allowed herself to breathe. When the camp announced work assignments, uncertainty rippled through the barracks. Farm labor, the interpreter had said. You will be sent in groups of 6, no trouble, no escape attempts. The women exchanged looks. Farming sounded harmless, but they'd been warned. Americans despised them. Americans were vengeful. Americans were dangerous. By sunrise Monday, the truck rumbled down the dusty road toward Sam's farm. Sam was tightening his boots when he heard it approach. His foreman, Calvin Turner, stood beside him, older, weary, with a voice that carried more gravel than sound. Here they come, Calvin muttered. The truck halted, kicking up clouds of red dirt. A young corporal jumped out first, clipboard under his arm. Mr. Brooks, he said, saluting with a stiff arm. These are your workers, 6 female POWs. They speak some English. The tall one, Lena, speaks the most. The women climbed out one by one. Their uniforms were clean but worn, their faces expressionless, their backs straight in deliberate military posture. Sam took a slow breath. They looked nothing like propaganda had described. No monstrous features, no cold sneers, just tired eyes and stiff dignity. He stepped forward. You'll be working the cotton fields, he said. Long rows, tough harvest. You'll have water whenever you need it. Noon break in the barn. You follow Calvin. Any questions? Lena stepped slightly ahead, not with arrogance, but duty. "We understand," she said. Her accent shaped each word, softening the harshness of English. "We will work." The group moved toward the fields. Sam watched them walk, 6 silhouettes against a vast, green landscape. Something inside him tightened. He didn't know if it was resentment, pity, or simply the strangeness of seeing the war spill directly onto his land. He only knew life had shifted the moment they stepped off that truck. The first day unfolded in complete silence. The women bent into their tasks with mechanical precision, hands moving swiftly through the cotton, never pausing. They did not look at Sam. They did not look at Calvin. They seemed determined not to acknowledge anything beyond the plants in front of them. But Sam watched them. At mid-morning, he brought water in large metal jugs. They drank quickly, almost desperately, keeping their eyes lowered. Lena, however, glanced up just once. Her expression carried no expectation, just confusion, like kindness was a language she had forgotten how to understand. By Wednesday, Sam noticed Lena studying the farmhouse on occasion, not greedily, not with escape in mind, but with a longing so subtle it barely registered. It struck Sam their last memory of home was years behind them, buried under rubble and war. But Thursday changed everything. One of the youngest prisoners, a girl named Clara, barely 20, collapsed in the cotton. The others rushed to her. Lena knelt beside her, her voice rapid and steady in German. Sam and Calvin hurried over. Heat exhaustion, Lena said with clinical certainty. She needs shade. Water. Now, they carried Clara to the barn, laying her gently on hay bales. Lena worked like a seasoned nurse, cool cloth on the forehead, loosened uniform, elevated feet. After a tense minute, Clara began to stir. "She will be fine," Lena said. "But she must not work today." Sam nodded. "None of you will." Lena's head snapped toward him, surprise flashing across her face. "That is not required," she said. Sam looked at the sun slicing through the barn doorway. "It's August in Mississippi. The fields ain't going anywhere." For the first time, Lena's expression softened just slightly. A crack in the wall, a beginning. Friday arrived with a sun that felt closer than usual, hanging low and heavy, turning the Delta into a blistering oven. Sam had barely slept the night before. Something about the moment with Clara, Lena's calm urgency, the women's quiet gratitude had settled deep inside him. These were not soldiers. These were not monsters. These were women torn from their lives, deposited into a country they had been told would crush them. And yet, instead of cruelty, they were met with fields and silence and an American farmer trying his best to follow the rules. But that morning, Sam broke one. He brewed sweet tea, not the mild version Northerners made, but real Mississippi sweet tea, the kind his late wife had perfected. Strong black tea, 2 cups of sugar dissolved while still hot, a squeeze of lemon, then poured over ice until the pitcher sweated like it was alive. In the South, sweet tea wasn't a drink. It was a sign of welcome, hospitality, humanity. And he knew it was forbidden to offer gifts to POWs. He didn't care. By noon, the heat had climbed past 95 degrees. The women gathered in the barn, sitting quietly on hay bales. Their uniforms clung to their backs. Sweat lined their brows. They shared one dented water jug, passing it around without speaking. Sam stepped inside carrying a tray, pitcher glistening with condensation, 6 glasses beside it. They froze. To them, it looked like a trap, a trick, something that made no sense. Lena stepped forward cautiously. "What is this?" she asked. "Sweet tea," Sam said. "It'll cool you down." The women exchanged whispers. Fear rippled through the room like a cold draft. One of them, a thin, anxious woman named Marta, pulled back slightly. Why would he bring us this?" she murmured in German. "Is it poisoned?" another asked under her breath. Lena's jaw tightened. She turned to Sam. "You drink first," she said quietly. Sam blinked, then understood. They truly believed kindness could not come without cruelty hidden beneath it. They had been told Americans would hurt them. They expected it. He picked up a glass, filled it with amber liquid, and drank. The sweet, cold tea slid down his throat. He held Lena's gaze the entire time. A long moment passed before Lena exhaled. Something in her posture shifted, wariness loosening, confusion deepening. She filled a glass, lifted it to her lips, and drank slowly. Her eyes widened. The others hesitated, then drank as well. Their shoulders eased. Their breaths steadied. Heat gave way to relief. The barn filled with a feeling Sam hadn't seen since the war began. Something like peace. Later that afternoon, while the women rested in the shade, Sam stepped outside the barn and leaned against the doorframe. The cicadas screamed across the fields. The world felt strangely still. He wasn't sure why he had risked breaking the rules. Maybe it was his wife's recipe, maybe the photograph of his sons in uniform, maybe the memory of seeing Lena kneel over Clara with a tenderness he thought the war had stolen from her. Or maybe it was simply that cruelty was a burden he refused to carry. Inside, the women began whispering, not fearfully this time, but with the trembling spark of curiosity. Maybe they are not what we were told, Marta murmured. Lena stared at the glass in her hand. Maybe none of us are. That evening, the truck took them back to Camp Devlin, but the atmosphere had changed. A layer of suspicion had cracked. A seed had been planted not in the garden behind Sam's barn, but in the hearts of 6 women who had expected only hatred. As the truck drove away, Lena looked back through the slats in the wooden sides. Sam was standing on the porch, head in hand, watching them leave, not as enemies, but as people. And for the first time since their capture, the future didn't feel entirely hopeless, just uncertain, just human. The following Monday arrived with a gentler sun, a soft orange glow spreading across the Mississippi Delta before the heat took its daily grip. Henry stood on his porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching the army truck approach in a thin cloud of dust. The women stepped down with the same rigid discipline as always, but something in their posture had changed. Their shoulders sat slightly lower, their eyes lifted just a little. Longer, suspicion remained, but curiosity had begun to loosen its hold. Elise walked a few steps ahead of the others this time. Her gaze, once sharp as flint, now carried a cautious warmth. She nodded at Henry, an acknowledgement so small it might have gone unnoticed unless someone was searching for it. Henry noticed. "Morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Turner," Elise replied, her accent thick but steady. The other women exchanged glances. It was the longest English sentence they had heard her speak. Ben motioned them toward the fields. "But he worked slower today. We keep it steady," he said to Henry quietly. "I don't want another fainting spell." Henry nodded. Elise overheard and offered, "Anna is feeling stronger today." She paused, then added quietly, "Thank you for Friday." Henry didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. By mid-morning, the sun was already burning the moisture from the ground. Henry grabbed the water jugs and walked toward the women. They worked in rhythmic unison, their movements precise, almost surgical habits carried over from hospital wards and battlefield infirmaries. Annalise, the youngest, wiped sweat from her brow and attempted a small smile. "The flowers outside your house," she said haltingly. "They are very beautiful." Henry blinked, surprised. "Thank you. My wife planted those years ago." "I thought so," Annalise replied softly. "They look loved." Her innocence struck him. These women had been dragged through deserts, bombings, starvation, and propaganda, and still they recognized beauty. Round noon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly, rolling over the delta with a strange intensity. Rainstorms in Mississippi carried their own violence, fast, loud, drenching, everything in minutes. "Storm incoming," Ben shouted. The women dropped their sacks and followed him toward the barn. Rain began to hammer the tin roof as soon as they stepped inside, lightning cracking open the sky. The barn felt small now, filled with their damp uniforms, uneven breathing, and shifting nervous energy. Elise glanced anxiously at the door every time thunder hit. "In Tunisia," she said quietly, "storms were different, but the sound, it reminds me of shelling." Anna wrapped her arms around herself and whispered, "It sounds like bombs." Henry hesitated, but only for a second. He reached into an old wooden crate, pulled out a kerosene lantern, and lit it. The warm glow replaced the blue-gray stormlight, casting soft shadows across the barn. "It's just weather," he said gently. "A loud one, but harmless." Elise exhaled shakily. "It is difficult to separate the two." "I know," Henry said softly. "My boys, they write of the same thing." Something shifted then, a thin thread connecting fear to understanding, guilt to grace. The storm lasted nearly an hour, and in that hour, something remarkable happened. The silence broke not from fear, but from Annalise humming a tune, soft, almost shy at first. Then another woman joined, and another. Elise hesitated, then lifted her voice, clear and calm. It was a German lullaby, a simple one, gentle and familiar. Henry had never heard anything like it. The barn, once a place of sweat and work, filled with a sound that felt suspended between two worlds. Music that carried memories of homes shattered, families separated, and futures uncertain. Yet somehow, it wasn't sad, it was hopeful. When the song ended, Henry realized he'd been standing still, barely breathing. That was, he cleared his throat. "Beautiful," Elise bowed her head slightly. It is a song mothers sing to children, to remind them that storms always pass. Henry swallowed hard. They do, he said. Eventually, by the time the rain stopped, the world outside gleamed with new life. The fields steamed, the sky brightened, and the air carried the fresh scent of soaked earth. As the women prepared to return to camp, Elise approached Henry again. You treated us kindly today, she said. You didn't have to. Henry met her eyes. Kindness isn't rationed, Miss Adler. She held his gaze, studying him as if searching for the lie, and finding none. Maybe, she whispered. The world is not as we were told. Henry nodded. Maybe it never was. The truck rumbled in the distance. The day had changed nothing and yet everything. The walls between them had not vanished, but they had cracked, and once a wall cracks, it never truly stands the same again. The November wind slid across the Mississippi Delta like a cold whisper, rattling the cotton stalks that had been stripped bare after harvest. The work had shifted, now less picking, more mending, hauling, repairing fences, trimming dead growth in the winter garden behind the barn. The German women arrived bundled in thin army-issued coats, breath visible in the morning air, their steps crunching over frost-covered soil. Henry watched them approach. From the porch, his hands tucked into his denim jacket pockets, the fatigue of the season heavy in his shoulders. He wasn't sure when it had happened. Maybe it was Anna's collapse in the field, or the day Elise corrected his irrigation trench with the precision of a trained medic, or the moment Lot had laughed a small, accidental sound when one of the farm dogs startled her. But at some point, the divide between prisoners and people had weakened. They worked differently now, not with fear, not exactly, but with something that hovered close to unspoken respect. They still kept distance, still followed rules, still quieted when guards appeared. But their eyes held less panic, their movements less tension. Except Elise. She moved with the old vigilance still clinging to her shoulders, a habit built in hospital tents near North Africa's burning winds. She scanned doorways before entering, flinched at sudden noises, and often stopped halfway through a task as if listening for something only she could hear. Henry noticed it, though he never asked. He had seen the same hollow alertness in men who returned from Guadalcanal. That morning, as he walked the women toward the barn, he saw Lot studying the sky, head tilted. The birds, she murmured in German. Elise translated quietly. She says the geese fly different here. The formation is wrong. Lot pointed again, her expression almost childlike. For a moment, she wasn't a prisoner, she was simply someone remembering what home looked like thousands of miles away. Henry found himself smiling. Inside the barn, he handed out work, sorting tools, prepping the seed trays for spring, repairing a wooden crate. They moved with practiced efficiency, and he felt that familiar strangeness again, the odd comfort of routine shared with people he was supposed to hate. Near noon, while the women worked in a circle mending rope and crates, Elise paused, pressing a hand to her left forearm. Henry noticed the movement, the faint tremor in her fingers. You all right? He asked quietly, careful not to startle her. Elise hesitated. Cold makes old injuries ache, she said. Her accent softened the vowels, but the meaning was clear. Henry nodded. He lifted a hand in a gesture toward a stool. Take a minute if you need. Her eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with surprise. We do not rest before noon, she said. You do if something hurts, Henry replied. She didn't sit, but he saw the smallest shift, less rigidity, a breath released slowly. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and spilled gold across the barn beams, one of Henry's dogs trotted inside carrying a scrap of cloth in its mouth. The women froze, uncertain. Henry chuckled. That fool dog thinks everything on this farm belongs to him. To demonstrate, he pulled the cloth from the dog's mouth and tossed it aside. The dog barked happily. To Henry's surprise, the women laughed, not one polite laugh, but all of them, sudden and genuine, their voices echoing in the hollow barn like a sound that hadn't been allowed in years. Even Elise smiled, barely, but enough to soften the sharp lines of her face. For a moment, it felt like winter had cracked open and let warmth slip through. As the laughter faded, Elise approached Henry with careful steps. Why do you do this? She asked. He blinked. Do what? This, she gestured to the barn, to the work, to the unspoken gentleness threaded through his actions. You treat us as if we are not prisoners. You're working my land, Henry said simply, and your people. Both things can be true. Elise looked down at her hands, roughened from months of labor. In Germany, we were told Americans hated us, and in America, Henry answered, we were told Germans were born cruel. Are you? she asked softly. Henry paused. Are you? Elise's silence was long, but not hostile. More like she was searching for pieces of herself. She'd lost between Tunisia and the Atlantic. Outside, the noon truck horn sounded, calling them back to camp. The women gathered their coats, stepping into the fading light and cold air. Elise lingered, watching Henry with an expression he couldn't quite name. Sorrow, gratitude, fear, all tangled together. We return tomorrow, she asked. Yes, Henry replied. She nodded once. Good. As they walked away, Henry realized something had shifted. Not dramatic, not spoken, but real. The distance between them had narrowed just enough that the next moment, the one coming soon, the moment involving a pitcher of sweet tea, would hit them all with the force of a truth none had been ready to confront. The day was coming when fear and kindness would collide in a single glass. The day arrived with a deceptive gentleness, the kind that made the Delta look almost peaceful despite the cold that lingered in the air. Thin winter sunlight drifted across the fields in pale ribbons, catching on frost still clinging to fence posts. Henry had been awake before dawn, stoking the stove, feeding the dogs, and thinking far more than he usually allowed himself to. Something felt different in his chest, a quiet insistence he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was Elise's question from the day before. Maybe it was the sound of the women laughing in the barn. Or maybe it was simply time for something to break the invisible weight they all carried. He boiled water, watching steam curl upward. Black tea, strong, sugar far more than he'd ever add for himself. It was how his late wife made it, the way she claimed sweet tea could soften any hard day. He didn't know whether it could soften a war, but he had to try. When the women arrived that morning, bundled against the lingering cold, Henry could see an immediate shift in the way they carried themselves. Not relaxed, no, that wasn't possible, but something in their shoulders seemed less clenched, their eyes less fixed on some distant worry. Elise walked quietly, her steps measured, but Henry noticed she wasn't scanning the tree line like she usually did. That alone felt like its own small miracle. They worked for hours repairing tool handles and clearing the winter beds behind the barn. Henry fetched supplies from the house and returned with a tray in his hands, the pitcher of sweet tea, and 7 glasses clinking lightly with each step. The winter light made the amber liquid glow faintly, like captured sunset. When he entered the barn, everything went still. 6 women froze. Elise's hands paused mid-knot, fingers stiffening. Lot lowered the rake she'd been holding. They watched him set the tray down on a crate as though he had placed a live snake between them. Henry felt the weight of their silence. He knew exactly what it was now, fear disguised as understanding, understanding disguised as caution. War had trained them to doubt anything that looked like kindness. He lifted the pitcher slightly. It's cold, he said. You've been working hard. Thought this might help. Elise translated automatically, though her voice wavered. The others stared. Their eyes darted between Henry, the pitcher, the glasses, and each other. Henry could feel the tension building like invisible cords pulled tight across the room. No one will drink first, Elise said quietly, almost apologetically. They think she didn't finish. Henry nodded once. Not offended, not surprised, just understanding. He reached out, took a glass, and poured the tea. The room seemed to hold its breath as the ice clinked against the glass. He lifted it to his lips and drank. Slow, deliberate, enough to make sure there could be no doubt. Then he set the empty glass down. The women stared at him. A full 5 seconds passed. Anna stepped forward first. Cautious but steady, she poured herself a small amount, sniffed it once like an animal unsure of new territory, and sipped. Her eyes widened. Sue, she murmured, sweet. Then she took a longer sip. Lot followed, then Greta, then 2 others. Elise was last. She lifted her glass with trembling hands, drinking as though she didn't trust the moment to stay long enough for her to understand it. When the tea touched her tongue, something shifted in her expression, something soft, stunned, and painfully human. Henry watched them all drink, relief pooling into something like warmth in his chest. For a moment, they weren't enemies, prisoners, or symbols in someone else's war. They were tired people, holding warm coats around their shoulders, sharing a glass of sweetness in a world that had given them far too much bitterness. When Elise finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. You could have left us in the cold. You could have followed the rules and done nothing. Henry shrugged lightly. Rules don't grow gardens. Or people. Elise looked at him with an expression that held grief, gratitude, and something like disbelief. Where I come from, kindness from the enemy is not expected. Maybe that's why it matters, Henry said. For a long moment, None of them moved. They simply stood there, sharing the stillness, the strange warmth of something healing in a place built for anything but healing. The truck horn sounded in the distance, calling them back to camp. As they put on their coats, something unspoken hung in the air. A thread spun between them, impossible to name, but impossible to ignore. Elise stepped close, just before leaving. "The tea," she said quietly. It was Mercy. Henry swallowed. "Just tea," he said. "No," she corrected gently. "Mercy." The women climbed into the truck. As it rolled away, Elise looked back at him through the bars, her eyes lingering for a moment, longer than the others. Henry stood in the fading winter light, watching them disappear down the road. Something inside him had changed. Something inside them had too. The war was still raging far across the ocean. But here, in the Delta's cold wind, a small truce had been born. If this story moved you even for a moment, then pause and imagine how many untold stories like this one still lie buried beneath the weight of history. Stories of enemies who became human to one another, of mercy offered in impossible circumstances, of simple acts, a glass of tea, a slice of bread, a moment of courage that changed the course of someone's life. If you want more real, hidden, and powerful stories the world has forgotten, then don't leave without subscribing. Your support helps these voices: German nurses, American farmers, prisoners, soldiers, ordinary people caught in extraordinary times, be heard again. Hit subscribe, tap the like button, and share this video so more people can witness history, not as dates and battles, but as human moments that still matter. And if you want the next story maybe even more unbelievable than this one, turn on notifications, because the past is full of secrets, and we're just getting started uncovering them.